Now we're going to talk about cyclical unemployment, which is the unemployment that's correlated with the business cycle. Unemployment will rise during a recession and fall during an expansion. It'll rise during a recession because when GDP falls, there's less production. Firms are laying off labor. So with idle labor and capital, economic growth is not being maximized, and the ability of the economy to create jobs falls. Here's a look at the business cycle, its effects on the unemployment rate. These shaded columns are different times during the last 70 years that there's been a recession, and the solid blue line is the civilian unemployment rate. You can see how it spikes during recessions. You can see that the recession in the early 1980s and the last recession are, in terms of unemployment, the worst recessions since World War II. You can also see in this graph where there's a plot of the change in the unemployment rate versus the real GDP growth rate. And at growth rates that are the kind of the average growth rate, the unemployment rate is kind of stable. At a higher than the average growth rate, the unemployment rate is going to be falling. And at lower than this average growth rate, the unemployment rate is going to be rising. The thing to note here is that if the growth rate is below, say, around 3%, that means that the unemployment rate is likely to rise. There are some years where you had relatively slow growth and falling unemployment, but most of the time we expect you to need 3 to 4% growth to really generate any decline in the unemployment rate. What causes cyclical unemployment? Well, that goes to what causes business cycles. And the view of the business cycles theory, which is something we're going to discuss at length in the next few chapters, it's either caused by real shocks. These could include oil shocks, for example, or by falling aggregate demand. Okay? This can be thought of as a mismatch between the level of wages and the level of prices. This graph shows for the past recessions the number of months from peak employment, what has happened to the percent of job losses relative to peak employment. So that means that the current recession is more profound in terms of its decline in the unemployment rate and more long-lasting, out to 36 months, 3 years, than virtually any recession, really. It's the most serious bout of long-lasting unemployment in the United States since World War II. Things have improved since these data, but they're still not back in terms of peak employment to where we were before the recession in 2007. There's a concept that's important. It's called the natural unemployment rate, which is just that portion of the unemployment rate which is not cyclical. In other words, the natural unemployment rate is defined as structural unemployment plus frictional unemployment. The natural unemployment rate can change over time, just as the cyclical unemployment rate can change over time. Another difficult issue is that one kind of unemployment may turn into another. Cyclical unemployment can become structural. If a person has been thrown out of work because of a garden variety recession, but their skills atrophy, then they may become structurally unemployed. Here's a view of how the natural unemployment rate, the red line, may have evolved over time relative to the total unemployment rate. Again, the natural unemployment rate is imperfectly measured. It's estimated because we don't know exactly what constitutes frictional and structural unemployment numerically, even though conceptually they're very well defined.